Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. Welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. This one is possibly a one-off. We could probably do it again because I'm actually here today with Jeanne Bliss, who's got her own podcast. So this will go out in two places at probably two different kind of times. And Jeanne and I are going to just have a dig around about some of the stuff that's going on in customer experience right now. And you'll hear it in a number of places. So
that's right. Yes, and I like how you say my name. It's Jeanne, though, so we can do it either way. We could do Jeanne or Jeanne.
Sorry, Jeanne. Sorry, that's fine.
Oh, it's all good.
I stand corrected.
Oh no, all good.
So Jeanne, what's top of mind for you right now? I mean, let's we're going to make this short and punchy. But what's top of mind? Let's make it like, I don't know, an outpouring of. And another thing.
Yeah.
So what's top of mind for you right now?
Well, what I'm seeing and talking to people about, I was just on the road this week, is the responsibility we have to make this work not its own silo. Now that we've labeled it, it is CX, and we're going to do CX. Well, CX isn't something you do. This is fundamentally a shift in leadership and how you will and will not choose to grow your business and lead your people and enable them to do the right thing. What's happening that is worrying me, challenging me, and quite honestly, I'm really trying to guide people away from this, is this notion of a list of whack-a-mole items doesn't mean you're changing the culture of your company.
Sure.
But yet it's giving CEOs a false positive that, man, we're really focusing on this.
Yeah.
And we're not fundamentally changing anything the customer can feel, but yet we're patting ourselves on the back. So that's really bothering me right now.
You know what? I hear you, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's one of the things that, so I know we talked about this before the call, that when my new book, the Punk CX, is
great book.
Thank you. It's born of this frustration that there's a lot of activity, but not a lot of results. And people are taking this very, almost like, it's like a recipe-driven sort of like approach to things. One of the bits in the book, I mean, rather than chapters, I call them tracks because it's like this musical thing, right?
Right.
And one of the ones is that it says, I asked the question, are you an artist or are you just coloring in? And the question being, it seems to me that there's a lot of people, like you talk about the list of whack-a-mole ideas sort of thing. Yeah. It's like, it's a coloring in thing. So a lot of people are coloring in expecting to create art, right? And then go back to the bigger sort of thing about CX is like going, and it's become a thing. And I like
That's
a profession, right. I say in inverted kind of commas. And it's a bit like, but it's not a thing. You know, because we don't control it. It belongs to somebody else. We're in service to it.
That's right.
As it were.
Well, and I think what happens when something becomes a thing is that now we've got mechanics around it that a lot of people come in and find they can make money on. And again, bully for that, but voice of customer or journey mapping, all of these. So we're focusing on the mechanics, not the meaning of the work.
Yeah.
And so tell us more about your book, your Punk CX book, and how are you suggesting that people use it to get past this logjam? Because to me, it's a big logjam. We're relegating CX to a department or a person in the middle of the organization sometimes, and they can't solve the ills of the systemic things that have caused it.
Yeah, no, indeed. So for me, if I go back and tell you the origin of the idea.
Sure.
It was born of a rant that I had with a friend of mine in a pub over a pint of Guinness, Well, actually, I had a few pints.
Perfect beginning.
Absolutely. Kind of like, I think drunks would call it a moment of clarity.
I love it.
And I was just frustrated. This is about 18 months ago, and I was frustrated with the state of where things were at. And I said, like, God, I wish people would just do something a bit more punk. And that sat with me for a little while. And then I kind of started to think about it sort of about 6 months later. And it made me, and I thought about the music angle of it. And I thought, well, where did punk come from? Because I'm actually a fan of punk, but post-punk rather than the original kind of punk. I'm not old enough, even though I've got the grey hair, to be an original punk. But punk exploded at the back of prog rock in the 1970s. And prog rock was this kind of really, whilst quite popular, was also this really complicated, elaborate, kind of like, intricate sort of like musical kind of like genre where your gift was measured about in terms of like how fast you can play your guitar or how many different synthesizers you can play.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Blah blah blah. Now, and therefore, and at its kind of like height, it was accused of almost like being more interested in itself and its own virtuosity than it was to do with the audience. The audience were like
what the outcome was for the they were so involved in themselves and patting themselves on the back for this and getting involved in that. Yeah.
And so punk exploded at the back of that with its kind of said with its idea. It's like it's a DIY democratic approach to it. It's all about the music, and anybody can make music. And you don't need a PhD to kind of to do that. So anybody can pick up and learn how to play 3 chords or whatever, and just make some noise. And some of them got really good at it, right? And there's some really talented sort of people. And that made me think, well, actually, it's fascinatingly that I think the CX space is looking a lot like the prog rock space did in the 1970s. Overly complicated, dominated by technology, codified, certified, benchmarked, kind of like maturity framework, yada, yada, all the whole sort of thing. And it's like becoming more interested in itself and losing sight of the customers. And therefore I thought, there's some interesting kind of like similarities there. And therefore, as a result, I thought, so therefore what would a punk version of CX look like? And that's kind of where I kind of got to. And I thought, well, actually, if we're going to think about what punk version of CX look like, well, we have to think about things differently. We have to dare to be different. We have to think that we have to kind of choose to be it's for you and not for you, because we don't need to be liked by everybody. We need to kind of almost think about it doesn't necessarily need to be a holistic thing. It could be you just double down on 1 or 2 things.
Agree.
And that's kind of that's where you kind of get the core of your meaning, and that's where you kind of attract kind of people. And so it's the book is, I call it like because it's kind of short, it's full of graphics and color. It's like a full color thing. I call it a visual slap in the face for the customer experience industry. And it's a bit shouty and a bit sweary and and it's supposed to be annoying and irritating, but also inspiring and motivating in equal measure. And
and break it into bite-sized pieces for people, right?
Well, exactly. And also the thing is that, it is almost a bit like there's some big ideas in there, but are delivered in a really kind of short and snappy kind of thing. So it's a bit like, excuse my language, wake the fuck up. Because we have got like 18 months, I believe, or 2 years before, if we don't start delivering results, this industry doesn't start delivering results for the organizations that buy into the sort of the cause, as it were. We've got about 18 months before we get put in the too hard to do column.
Yeah.
And we go the same way, and it goes the same way as CRM did it about 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's so funny, Adrian. We're just so on the same page. I often say, look, I'm worried this is going to be CRM all over again. One of the things I'm seeing is that we're making customer experience a silo when it is the farthest thing from a silo that it should be. The whole idea of this work is to be a uniter. Yeah. On my show is called the Human Duct Tape Show, because it's supposed to be creating awareness and understanding so you can focus on a few things with the perspective of the whole versus people cherry picking individually. But we are now, making it a silo. Okay, let's bring in CX, let's bring in accounting, etc. Yeah. And, you and I are on the same page regarding, in many ways, what we've tried to do with books. Right before yours, I had this book called Would You Do That to Your Mother, which is really, there she is. There she be. Very similar because, I called it a little bit of tough love wrapped in velvet. You
Yeah.
know, come on,
Same
people,
thing. Same
what is
thing.
happening? I hired a cartoonist. You know, I did some of these kind of cuckoo videos because we have made it too hard.
Yeah.
Let's talk about leadership and the absence of leadership in this work, because I think that is fundamentally the core problem with what's happening.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's like here's the thing. I was, I have a challenge, kind of like to kind of leaders that are listening to this. And the challenge is kind of, when was the last time that you served one of your customers? When was the last time that you went out there and you said hello to them on the phone, or you kind of like shook their hand, or you kind of like you helped them kind of like fulfill an order, or you can actually went and visited them or whatever, not as part of necessarily just a sales role, but just as a case of like how to do the kind of what's happening, how are we doing?
Or you did what they have to do. You tried to open an account, or you downloaded a thing, or, whatever. I agree. I think that we're so emotionally disconnected and experientially. Go ahead, keep going.
But I think it's absolutely linked to your point around the CX is becoming so siloed, because if it becomes a responsibility of something, then you end up with a kind of a CEO who has kind of a whole these people that are
that's right. They're relegating it. They're just relegating it.
Yeah, relegating it. So like, I can't do that because that's their responsibility. And therefore, if they don't take responsibility for it, and they don't get an experiential, visceral sort of like feel for what is actually going on, then it just becomes another thing.
Well, and one of the things I've been on a rant this week with I gave 4 speeches this week, and I do these dinner conversations, which are really cool. And two biggies every time. One is, have you united your C-suite? Because if you don't unite the C-suite, Adrian, everybody comes in with a different version of the truth. Everyone has a completely different perspective on where you are today, on what the KPIs are based on their internally driven KPIs for their part of the organization. And we haven't united the language of leaders, which changes how they drive the accountability to customers and employees, and what they hold people accountable to. Yeah. And in my CCO book, that's the first chapter. It's unite the C-suite, but we aren't doing that. And in the absence of uniting the C-suite, the work is always going to hit the wall of the strongest silo-based leader who either refutes it or wants to change it, or whatever. So I think fundamentally that is a big issue.
I think I completely agree with that. And the way I think about it in the book, in my book, I've got this little kind of page that I invite people to tear out, and it's like like a postcard, a letter to the CEO. It says, "Dear CEO,"
oh, love that.
Basically goes, blah 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 blah. There's dysfunction in the thing. Research supports that there's dysfunction in boardrooms. You're the team captain. Please sort it out. And then you can sign it and address it and send it to the CEO. Now, the way I look at it is, it's a bit like being either the manager or captain of a sports team, right? If you can't get all your players to agree to kind of a way of playing together, that's not their fault. It's your fault, because you're the one that's in charge. So sort it out. And if somebody's not willing to play ball, then bench them.
Yeah. But I don't think people are seeing it that way. Again, we're delegating it. The other thing which I think is fundamentally so interesting, and again, I've had this conversation with all these people this week, and I do it all the time, is this notion of, are you really measuring and honoring the customer as your asset?
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. Yes, you're following your survey scores, but are you watching the volume and value of incoming customers, subtracting the volume and value of your lost customers, and creating a one company version of net customer asset growth or loss? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, that is totally our job, which is to grow that customer base and the value of that customer base, not through selling and just upselling, but earning the right to the growth of that customer base. Yeah. And I was just at a group this week, and I said, do you have one version of new? Do you have one version of lost? Do you have one version of value? And they're like, well, we do it by product. They said that gives your CEO nothing. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to roll it up. And again, it goes right back to the absolute truth that the silos don't organically unite.
No, absolutely. I think it's right. I mean, it's like ultimately they're all in the business of building a bigger and stronger bucket, and fix the leaks and kind of figure out how to make it bigger and stronger. That's kind of that's it. And it's like, I'm doing I've been speaking to an organization kind of recently, and they're an acquisition kind of engine. They are kind of
and that's what we run up the flagpole and we get all excited about. We don't talk about how many we've lost, right?
Yeah. And so the thing is that they're this, despite all this kind of like customer-centric and customer experience kind of age of the customer sort of like rhetoric, many organizations are completely still driven by acquire
and survey scores, which may or may not, depending on what you're doing, be connected to growth, right?
Yeah. And so it's a bit like going, but yeah, that's a bit like kind of like having just a massive tap that you're turning on and trying to fill up your bath, but while realizing at the same time your plug hole hasn't got a plug in it.
That's right. But it's not the language of leaders. I mean, one of the things I encourage people to do is you got to build this version of it's customer math. Yeah. And what I encourage, you may agree with me, is I want you to use whole numbers, not retention rates, because retention rates will also give you a false positive. Mm-hmm. If you're patting yourself on the back that we're at 67%, brouhaha, big deal, you don't realize that you're not growing because you're, like you said, leaking on the bottom. So I want to say we brought in 100,000 new, but we lost volume and this potential value, but we lost 75,000 with this value they brought with them. And you've got to put value into the equation because one isn't equal one.
Yeah.
And then net it out, do the math.
One of the fascinating things, I remember having this conversation with an old friend of mine, kind of guy, and he took over this big division at a software firm. And he said like, he was given these good, like, almost like arbitrarily given these targets, which said,
of course,
we want you to take this and we want you to grow it by 10%. And he was like, brilliant. And he had a look at it and he was like going, yeah, but we're kind of like, we're losing customers at a rate of 10% per year. Therefore, I have to grow it at 20% per year just to kind of hit the kind of target.
Stay even, yeah.
10% and I'll stand still. And it's a bit like you can't do one without the other.
Right.
And it's so it's a bit like, so the thing that frustrates me is that we've supposedly been in this sort of space right now. Customers in charge. We've got to like focus on the customer, serve the customers well, et cetera, et cetera. And yet we still haven't shaken off a lot of the 20th century sort of like, business machismo. I.e., it's kind of like just let's go and sort of like round up and kind of like gather and acquire sort of thing, because that's kind of the sexy thing to do. And you're like going, but it's not sustainable, ladies and gentlemen.
It's not sustainable. It's giving us a false positive. And again, we aren't doing any favors to our CEOs because we're not rolling up the true picture of growth. Mm-hmm. And when you connect the work to growth and ROI, you'll finally get their attention. But I think that's one of the core issues that is getting us in the way.
Yeah, and here's the thing. It's like, and if you still haven't gotten it, then it's like, marketing and sales is hard and it produces a lot of waste. And it's like going, and it's like going, give yourself a break. Make yourself things that, it's easier. It's the old sort of saying, it's easier to keep a customer than it is to get a customer. It's like, then why don't we choose an easier life? Right? Let's just be smart and lazy about this at the same time.
Well, and if you want to start simple, it's so interesting. The other day people were like, well, what's the difference between customer service and customer experience? And I said, well, customer service is the reactive response to a problem. Customer experience is the proactive architecting of how you're going to deliver value. And they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. I'm like, okay. But here's the deal. Start small, prevent the reasons for people calling your customer service department because that's costing you money.
Yep.
So if you need to be tactical, identify those few things and you'll get a leg in at least and start to prove that you're preventing your customers from playing service roulette, which costs you money every time they call you because you're not helping them.
I think that's right. I mean, I would slightly disagree on your definitions.
Go for it.
And I would say something slightly more radical and I would say that we don't do customer experience because it belongs to somebody else. We do service.
We enable the company to understand there's an experience and come together.
So we can do understanding and insight and service and delivery and operations and all those sort of things. Those are things that we can do.
but we have no control over what somebody experiences. We can just do our best and kind of reduce the gap between what is a good and a bad experience, and give ourselves a fighting chance. Because there's a fundamental thing, which is like there's stuff that happens, and then there's what we make it mean.
I agree, but I think that if we start with a directive of what we want the experience to be, that's when we can line up our operations, our people, how we hire, etc.
Oh, completely.
That's the work, and experience tumbles out of that.
Yeah, no. Yes, you can set things. It's a bit like any old relationship, right? It's like if you want a good relationship, then don't be a doofus, right?
Yeah. Well, there you go. It's like marriage.
Exactly.
Hey, Adrian, this is the end of our first rant, but I think we should do some more of these.
Yeah, no, I think we should. Maybe we should kind of think about kind of like a Jeanne and Adrian kind of rant off.
I think we should. Let's do more. This has been a blast. Yeah,
let's do it. Well, I tell you what, let's talk offline. We'll sort something out. But that's been fun, being short, punchy to the point, and kind of look forward to kind of getting it out there and kind of creating some waves. And we'll see you next time.
Cool. Thanks so much. It's great to talk to you today. Okay.
All right.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new, and I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsco.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.